There are moments in sport that stop time. Not the walk-off home runs. Not the perfect games. Not the championship celebrations where champagne soaks everything and confetti falls from the rafters. The moments that truly stop time are quieter than that. Smaller than that. They happen in hallways, not stadiums. They happen after the cameras have been packed away and the crowd has gone home. This is one of those moments. After a game at Angel Stadium, a stadium that Shohei Ohtani called home for the first 5 years of his major league career, a source close to the organization revealed something that has since spread quietly through the baseball world, passed from person to person like something too precious to shout but too important to keep silent. Ohtani was walking through the corridor after the game. Still in the middle of the controlled chaos that follows a professional baseball game, teammates, coaches, media obligations, the 100 small demands that pull at a player in every direction. And then he stopped. Because across that corridor stood an elderly man. A man most people in that stadium would have walked past without a second glance. A man who had spent years at Angel Stadium not as a player, not as a coach, not as an executive, but as a janitor. One of the invisible people who keep a stadium running while the world watches the men on the field. Ohtani looked at him. And then he said 3 words that broke something open in everyone who heard them. I remember you. To understand why those 3 words carried the weight they did, you need to understand who this elderly man was, and what his years at Angel Stadium actually meant. His name has not been fully disclosed out of respect for his privacy. But sources close to the Angels organization have described him as a man who gave decades of his life to that stadium. He was not famous. He was not celebrated. He was not the kind of person whose name appears in headlines or whose face appears on broadcasts. He was the man who cleaned the corridors before the players arrived. Who emptied the bins in the locker rooms. Who mopped the floors that championship cleats walked across. Who made sure that when the stars of the sport showed up for work, everything was exactly as it should be. He did this quietly. Reliably. Year after year. And then, as happens to all of us eventually, time caught up with him. He retired from the role. He stepped away from the stadium that had been his workplace for so many years. And like most people who work behind the scenes in professional sport, he probably assumed that nobody from that world would remember him once he was gone. That is what made Ohtani's words so powerful. I remember you. Not a vague acknowledgement. Not a polite nod from a superstar who half recognizes a face from his past. A direct, clear, personal statement of recognition from one of the most famous athletes on the planet. Directed at a man who mopped floors for a living. According to the source who revealed this story, the encounter unfolded with a simplicity that made it even more powerful. The elderly man had been invited back to Angel Stadium for a special occasion, the kind of quiet, internal event that organizations sometimes arrange for long-serving staff members. He was not there as a celebrity. He was not there to be honored publicly or placed on a stage. He was simply there, standing in a corridor, perhaps hoping to see the stadium one more time. Perhaps hoping to feel, for just a moment, that the years he had given to that place had meant something. He did not expect Shohei Ohtani to notice him. Nobody in his position would have expected that. Ohtani was surrounded by people. The organized chaos of post-game life swirled around him. And yet something made him stop. Something made him look across that corridor at an elderly man standing quietly against the wall. And in that moment, the years collapsed. Because Ohtani did remember him. Not as a vague background figure. But as a specific person, someone whose presence had been a consistent, reliable part of his early years in Major League Baseball. Someone who had been there, quietly, in the background, on all those mornings when a young Japanese player was still learning what it meant to play in America. He walked across the corridor. He approached the elderly man directly. And he said, "I remember you." The source revealed that what followed was a brief but deeply genuine conversation. Ohtani asked about the man's health. He asked about his family. He expressed gratitude, not in the performative, press conference way that public figures sometimes express gratitude, but in the direct, personal way of someone who genuinely means what they are saying. The elderly man, according to those present, could not speak for a moment. And when he did speak, his voice was not steady. The world sees Shohei Ohtani through the lens of statistics. And the statistics are genuinely staggering: the home runs, the velocity, the MVP awards, the historic $700 million contract, the World Series championship with the Dodgers. But the people who have been closest to Ohtani throughout his career tell a different story. Or rather, they tell a story that the statistics cannot capture. They talk about a young man who arrived in Anaheim in 2018, barely 23 years old, carrying the weight of impossible expectations, unable to speak English fluently, navigating an entirely foreign culture in an entirely foreign country, and who, from his very first days at Angel Stadium, made a point of learning the names of everyone around him. Not just the coaches. Not just the trainers. Not just the veterans whose approval he needed to earn. Everyone. The clubhouse attendants. The kitchen staff. The security guards who checked credentials at the back entrance every morning. The grounds crew who prepared the field before dawn. Former Angels staff members have recalled, in the years since Ohtani left for the Dodgers, how he would greet people by name every single morning. How he would stop and actually listen when someone spoke to him, even through the language barrier. How he seemed genuinely interested in the people around him, not as a performance, not as a calculated image-building exercise, but as a pure reflection of something deep and unshakable in his character. This is not a recent development. This is not something that came with the fame or the money or the championship ring. This is who Ohtani has been since the very beginning. To understand where this quality in Ohtani comes from, you have to go back to Hanamaki, Iwate Prefecture. A small city in northeastern Japan. The place where Shohei Ohtani grew up. The elderly janitor at Angel Stadium, the man who mopped floors and emptied bins and made sure everything was in order before the stars arrived, was, in Ohtani's worldview, not beneath his attention. He was worthy of exactly the same respect as anyone else in that building. When the source revealed this story, the reaction across the baseball world was immediate. Former Angels players and staff members who were contacted about the story responded with zero surprise. One former teammate, speaking on condition of anonymity, said something that perfectly captured the universal sentiment inside that clubhouse. That's just Sho. That's exactly who he is. That's the part of him that never makes the highlight reels. On social media, as the story spread, the reaction was unlike most sports stories. There were no arguments. No debates. No hot takes dividing people into opposing camps. There was just emotion. People sharing the story with simple captions. Parents sending it to their children. Teachers using it in classrooms as an example of what genuine character looks like in a world that often rewards the opposite. Because the story touched something universal. Everyone has felt invisible at some point. Everyone has done work that went unnoticed. Everyone has wondered, in quiet moments, whether what they were contributing mattered to anyone beyond the immediate task in front of them. And everyone understands, on a deeply human level, what it means to be seen. To be remembered. To have someone, especially someone who had every reason in the world to walk straight past you, stop. Turn. Walk across a corridor. And say, with complete sincerity and zero performance, I remember you. This story reveals something that goes far beyond athletic ability. It reveals a standard of humanity. The people who have studied Ohtani most closely, coaches, teammates, analysts, journalists who have covered him for years, consistently return to the same observation. His greatness is not compartmentalized. It does not live only on the baseball field and switch off everywhere else. It is consistent. It is total. It shows up in the preparation before games and in the corridors after them. It shows up in the way he manages his nutrition and his recovery and his sleep. And it shows up in the way he treats a retired janitor standing quietly against a stadium wall. Because for Ohtani, these things are not separate. The discipline that makes him wake up before dawn and prepare his body with extraordinary precision is the same discipline that makes him pay attention to the people around him. The intentionality that makes him study opposing batters in obsessive detail is the same intentionality that made him learn the names of every staff member at Angel Stadium when he was a 23-year-old rookie who could barely speak the language. It is all one thing. It is all the same standard. And that standard does not have an off switch. The source revealed one final detail about that encounter in the corridor that has stayed with everyone who heard it. As Ohtani turned to continue down the corridor, after the conversation, after the genuine and unhurried exchange of words, after making sure the elderly man knew that his years at that stadium had not simply evaporated without leaving a mark on anyone, the man called after him. He said thank you. Not for an autograph. Not for a photograph. Not for any of the things that people typically thank famous athletes for. He said thank you for remembering. And Ohtani, according to those present, turned back one final time. He smiled, that quiet, genuine smile that anyone who has watched him closely will recognize immediately. And he said something that nobody present could quite hear, something soft, something personal, something that stayed between the two of them alone. And then he walked on. There is a reason this story spread the way it did. A reason why people who have never watched a single baseball game in their lives read it and felt something shift inside them. Because we live in a world that is very good at celebrating the spectacular and very poor at honoring the quiet. We celebrate the home runs. We forget the janitors. We remember the contract. We forget the people who cleaned the floors that made it all possible. Shohei Ohtani did not forget. In a corridor at Angel Stadium, with no cameras rolling and absolutely nothing to gain, he stopped. He crossed the floor. He looked at a man who had spent years being invisible to the world and he said 3 words that will stay with that man for the rest of his life. I remember you. The world needed to hear that story. Not because it is surprising, not if you have been paying close attention to who Ohtani really is beneath the statistics and the headlines. But because it is a reminder. A reminder that greatness is not only what you do on the field. It is who you are when the game is over. It is who you are in the corridor. It is whether, when you see someone standing quietly against a wall hoping to feel that their years mattered, you stop. Shohei Ohtani stopped. And somewhere tonight, an elderly man who once pushed a mop through the corridors of a baseball stadium is sitting at home knowing that his years meant something. That his presence was felt. That one of the greatest athletes alive looked across a room and remembered him. That is not a baseball story. That is a human story. And it brought tears to the eyes of the world for exactly that reason.